Good morning, everybody. Welcome. It's very wonderful to have everybody participating in our annual ATI, and it is the Connecticut Coalition to End Homelessness Housing Equals Justice Conference. We're really excited today to bring you this presentation on eliminating shelter waitlists. It's a very exciting topic to be talking about how we can continue to improve our services here in Connecticut. For our conference this year, we've built it around housing equals justice. As you can see from the slide, we are reframing homelessness as an issue of economic justice, racial justice, and criminal justice. And we will also be placing a special emphasis, of course, on re-examining how we are adapting and changing our systems because of the pandemic. We hope you'll also take a look at all the other workshops and offerings throughout the week and go to as many as you can. We have some really exciting speakers and keynote speakers and panels and trainings that are going on all throughout the week. Please spread the word to others. It's not too late to register. And you can also go on social media with the hashtag ATI 2020. For our sponsors, I also want to take a moment to thank Zillow and Bank of America as our presenting sponsors. They have enabled us to do this conference and also to be able to offer it to people free of charge, which was, I think, enormously helpful to many of us in these times. And I want to also thank today's workshop sponsor, Supportive Housing Works, and invite Jessica Kubicki with Supportive Housing Works to say a few words.
Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm Jessica Kubicki. I am the Director of Programs with Supportive Housing Works. We are the backbone agency in Fairfield County for the CAN and the COC. And just recently this year became the backbone agency for the CAN in Northwest. You guys are incredibly lucky to have Kay. She just finished our Emergency Shelter Learning Collaborative in Fairfield County for the last year and during COVID, and really helped push the mind frame to housing from shelter. And for that, we are eternally grateful. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Jessica. Thanks for your sponsorship and all the work that you guys do over there in Fairfield County and the Northwest for Supportive Housing Works. So for the speaker for today, I'd like to introduce, first I'd like to pause a minute just to introduce myself, which I forgot to do. I'm Mimi Haley, the Deputy Director at Connecticut Coalition to End Homelessness. We are really excited to be able to offer this conference this year. And I want to then just take a minute to say a few words about our featured speaker today. We are going to be talking about different ways and techniques for eliminating shelter waitlists, but primarily looking at some systems and organizational changes that we can do to begin to move forward towards that. We're really fortunate to have Kay. She's really unparalleled and with her enthusiasm and exuberance for ending homelessness, who is with the National Alliance to End Homelessness. Kay has over 20 years of experience in developing and administering rapid rehousing and homeless programs. And she's also led a local homeless coalition and has a continuum of care, a COC. She's currently a technical assistant specialist, and she develops and delivers training across the country, including rapid rehousing, retooling, transitional housing, and building a crisis response system. She's done some tremendous work already here in Connecticut, leading us in 3 emergency shelter learning collaboratives over the course of the last 4 years, which have been transformative. And she also works closely with rapid rehousing providers across the country to build their capacity and adopt best practices. Before joining the Alliance, Kay served as the Community Homeless Advisor for Lancaster County, Pennsylvania Coalition to End Homelessness, and provided leadership for the country's 10-year plan to end homelessness and the continuum of care. She served as Vice President for Programs for Tabor Community Services and she oversaw model program initiatives that focused on ending homelessness, including both prevention and rapid rehousing. She's received her degrees in social work and sociology from Eastern Mennonite University. And she's one of, I think, our most favorite people in the world here in Connecticut. We love having you here, and we are so appreciative, Kay, to have you here virtually today to challenge us and to share your wisdom. So please, Kay, take it away.
So thanks, Mimi. It's sort of, you know, those bios are always sort of interesting. I'm thinking, oh, maybe I should change my bio. But anyhow, yeah, I've been around a while working in this field, but today I really want to talk about ramping up system flow. And I think that, you know, we can really work at building a great crisis response system, but if we don't start really thinking about flow, we're not going to be able to move things forward. Next slide. This a little bit about the National Alliance on Homelessness, and I'm not actually going to say anything more on this. It's on the slide, and I work for the Center for Capacity Building, and we do technical assistance across the country. So today, sort of 3 things that I wanted to make sure that we cover today. So we really are going to talk about the importance of system flow and its impact on shelter wait lists, and then also the role that each system component has in making it better. And then also, how do we sort of reimagine our services? So really thinking in those ways, because I think sometimes we think, well, it's somebody else's job to worry about this, or it's somebody else's job to worry about this. So I want to talk about how each of us have a role in this system. But before I talk about system flow, I want to quickly talk about an effective homeless response system. So here's your effective goal. If you're going to have a good homeless response system, you want to make sure that you are helping that every person that becomes homeless to get them housed quickly, but you also want to be diverting people from imminent homelessness and living on the streets or coming into shelter whenever possible. So divert and house are the 2 main things of your, you want to be doing as your goal for an effective system. But your approach is systemic. It's not having a lot of these, boutique programs that, somebody does this and somebody does this, but it's about all of our interventions. We come together and align our interventions and resources across programs in a coordinated way. So we don't have a lot of boutique shelter models and boutique, I know I lose that term a lot, but like boutique rapid housing models or PSH, is that we want to have core models so that when somebody experiences homelessness, no matter where they touch the system, services are going to be the same. But we also want to make sure that every single provider is aligned and resources are committed to the goal, which is ending homelessness quickly and diverting whenever possible in a safe way. Oh, I put the clock on here. Let me just say quickly, thinking, and I forgot I added this to the slide, but I think what I want you to do is, instead of, we're a lot of great clocks and we all work together, we come to the table together. You may have heard me say this before, but your system, so, in your community, so each can in Connecticut is your own system. And your system is like one clock, and every single intervention, every program is a gear in that clock. And if those gears are not synced, if you're not working together in coordination with each other, what's going to happen to the clock? It's either going to slow down or it's going to stop working. And when you have wait list, it means that your gears are probably not connected and you're as well as they could be, and your clock is slowing down. And here's your end game. So, your goal is divert and housing. Your approach is we work as a system. The end game then is, if we do all of that, homelessness will be rare, brief, and one time. And we're going to eliminate wait lists to nowhere, because a wait list for shelter, for most people, won't get that shelter. We have found that a lot of times these wait lists grow and grow, and even on the rapid housing side or PSH side, as our wait lists grow, but people often don't get the resource for what they're on the wait list for. So in some ways, it's like a wait list to nowhere. How do we stop looking at wait lists as an option and start thinking about system flow instead? Next. And then, so what we want to do then in doing this is, people in housing crisis have access to immediate help. People are not unsheltered, and I think there's one more bullet on this slide. People do not spend long periods of time homeless, and maybe one more. Yep. And so people exit homelessness quickly. So we've got a place for everybody that has a housing crisis. Our system flow is such that when somebody has a housing crisis and we can't divert them, they have a place to go. So that means we don't have unsheltered people. And if people do get in shelter, they're, when they do get in, they're not being there for a long time, and that we are getting people to exit their homelessness quickly and they don't re-enter the system. That's what we mean by rare, brief, and one time. And then we want to look at performance. So in performance, we look at our system, and we don't look at it as individual programs, because somebody could say, I've got great outcomes in my program. And when I'm doing the emergency shelter learning collaboratives, I'm going to say, well, if you could say we've got great outcomes, we're moving people through more quickly, and we're exiting people to permanent housing. But if there's not an impact in your system, if the system performance is not getting better, it means that we still need to come together and look at, what our program could do better to make a difference on your system performance. So we want to, again, reduce inflow into homelessness. We want to make sure that we have outflow with access to permanent housing that happen quickly, and decreasing the average length of time people are homeless and returns to homelessness. But we want to be looking at it from a system point of view, not a programmatic point of view. And I think that's a lot different for a lot of us, because when I ran my programs, I was selling my program. So I'm always looking at what my program's doing. I wasn't looking at the impact on the system. And when I started becoming a systems thinker and looking at that, we were making a lot of changes to what I thought was a great program, but I realized I can have a great program with great outcomes. Maybe I'm serving the wrong people. Maybe I'm screening out the people that need me the most. Maybe there's more vulnerable people that I should be giving priority to. And maybe we should be, instead of doing this with this, rapid rehousing with these are folks that could self-resolve. And so we should be saving our rapid rehousing program. If my rapid rehousing program is so successful that everybody's doing great, probably I'm serving the wrong people. And so maybe those people could have self-resolved and didn't need me at all. And so we have to look at all of that and not just feel, oh, look, we're perfect, we don't need to change, which is sort of the way we can sometimes feel when our outcomes are good. But if our system's not getting better, we have to relook at ourselves. And the next slide. So basically then you want to have practice standards. So your practice standards is that the housing first approach is across all interventions, and that everybody across your interventions understands what housing first is and talks about it in the same way. Lots of people say they're housing first when I come and work in a community, and people say, well, yeah, we're housing first. And then we start talking about what a housing first organization looks like, and people go, okay, well, maybe we're not housing first. So really looking at that. We also need to have practice standards about diversion, and that, all of us have that responsibility of having those problem-solving conversations, and we want to make sure that it's always safe and appropriate, but we all take some responsibility in that, and that we have rapid identification and engagement of people. And notice that doesn't say rapid rehousing or putting people on a wait list. It means that we quickly get to know each person's housing needs, and we engage with them, and especially those experiencing unsheltered homelessness, that, it's not just about getting unsheltered people and putting them in shelters, but also engaging them and getting them housed. So we're constantly making sure that we know who those folks are that are unsheltered, and we're getting that number to go down. And we want quick, accessible, low barrier pathways to shelter and other crisis services, but with those short stays in shelter. And then rapid connections to any kind of permanent housing, right? For all sheltered and unsheltered people. The most important thing in this that I want you all to hear is that this is not about whether they're matched to housing resources. Often when I'm talking to people about, well, your exit's like this weekend, they go, well, we've had this person match and this person match, but they're waiting, and the rest haven't been matched yet. And I'm going, what are you doing to help those folks get housing? And people are like looking at me like a deer caught. Well, what do you mean? We've got a system, and the system puts them in a match, and then when they put them on a list, and then they eventually get matched. Well, that's not what system flow is. And in fact, we found that as we sort of became really good at the idea of coordinated entry, but our, you know, our wait lists or our by name list started growing and growing, but we weren't ramping up our exits. And so we have to start looking beyond our wait list, beyond the paid interventions that are there, and start thinking outside the box. Next slide. So this is sort of what a good coordinated entry system would look like in context. You've got coordinated entry, and you've got, you know, about half of your people, and for you guys in Connecticut, on the family side, it's more than half. On the single side, it might be about half, but you have these problem-solving conversations, and they don't come into the system. They're able to avoid homelessness. And then you have the folks that come into temporary shelter, right? And you also have people that are already out there that street outreach is doing. And, you know, the idea though, is you'll see there's an arrow from temporary shelter that goes directly over the top arrow right to housing. And that's the arrow that I think we've forgotten about sometimes in shelter in our programs, that we sort of forget that as shelter providers, we're supposed to be helping people through rapid exit approaches all the time move to housing, and that some people will get rapid rehousing. There's still a little box there for sub-transitional housing, like the GPD programs and some of the TH that might be there for like folks with substance abuse issues or really high barriers, you know. But the reality is that there's not much permanent, you know, permanent supportive housing, which also includes rapid rehousing. In your community, the majority of people are going to go on their own into your market rate housing. And click again. And this is the most important thing. All of this has to happen quickly, right? The idea that, well, I'm going to wait because I want my person to get something different or better. The longer people wait in shelter, the less successful they are in housing. And I know we sometimes don't realize that, but that in fact has been proven to be the case, that the less time people spend in shelter, the less likely they are to return to shelter, because shelter does not become a way of life. And that's why we see people that wait a long time and get a subsidy or get PSH and still don't make it and come back, because by that time the independent living idea is so foreign to them that they may not be able to manage it. Next slide. So now that we've talked about what a good system looks like, let's talk about system flow and its impact on wait lists. So a poor system flow is a wait list for shelter and a wait list for housing. I'm going to let that sit with you all. Do you have wait lists for shelter? Do you have wait lists for housing? If that's the case, then we need to start looking at what's going on in our system with system flow. And it doesn't mean that we add more stuff, because we found even when people add more stuff, if they haven't worked on system flow, they're still going to end up as a stuck system. And again, I want to remind you, and I know that right now Connecticut has this, so I'm just sort of putting this out there. Assignment to a wait list is not an outcome. It's not an outcome. An outcome is a success. An outcome is a result of something happening. And being on a wait list when you don't even know if you're going to get anything isn't an outcome. But so any assignment to wait list is really an indicator of an ineffective system and system flow. So I want us to start really rethinking, oh, well, we're done. We put that person on a wait list to, okay, we don't have a place for them to go. Let's start as a system talking about our system flow. Next slide. So this is actually a video about unsticking your system. And unfortunately, we couldn't figure out how to make it work. So I think you guys will have access to the PowerPoint, and when you get it, you'll be able to access the video there. Go ahead. So here's your characteristics of an effective system when you have good system flow. So by the way, the video, let me sort of try to say what the video talked about is symptoms of a system without good system flow are long wait lists for shelter, long stays in shelter, and unchanged numbers of unsheltered folks that either stay unchanged or continue to go up. So your unsheltered population is not changing or it's increasing. You have wait lists for shelter, you have long wait lists into housing, and you have long lengths of stay in shelter. If you have good system flow, on the other hand, is that your entire system is housing focused. And so you are really working on the prevention and diversion from homelessness whenever possible. And again, I actually had this in the beginning about the outcomes of an effective system. And so I'm not going to go over this again. These are the same things, but a good system flow are the very same things that I talked about are the indicators of programs in a good system. Next slide. All right. For you, I don't know about for you, but for me, this is a little small right now. But so capacity is not always the answer. I think sometimes people think, well, we need more rapid rehousing, or we need more shelter, or we need more PSH. And yes, I mean, we do. I mean, I'm not saying that we have enough stuff. We don't. But what we found in communities, they would add capacity and think, okay, we're done now. We added capacity. And then a year later, initially things would change, but a year later, they'd be right back because they hadn't changed how interventions work. So, you know, first you ask, is every intervention and organization housing first and housing focused? I mean, really housing first and really believing in your heart of hearts that everybody can be housed. Because if you have staff and programs that really don't believe that, it's going to stop system flow. Does everybody, organization and staff and our system, take responsibility that we can house all people through problem solving? Do we all believe it's our job to help people find quick housing, family, friends, maybe going back to where they came from in another community, finding roommates, finding rooms to rent? Are we all taking responsibility that we all, no matter who we are in an organization, no matter what our title is, everybody's job is to have these problem-solving housing conversations? That's going to ramp up system flow. Does everybody share the belief that all people experiencing homelessness can, and that means the word are able to be, not can as the way you guys talk about your cans, but can people really be housed? Do people in their heart of hearts believe that? Because if you have staff working with folks that don't really believe that, folks will not get housed, because we actually set the stage for how successful our people are going to be by the way we believe or don't believe in their abilities to make changes. When our community is faced with challenges, do we immediately start problem solving that challenge? Or do we start just complaining about the challenge, talking about somebody else having to do something? Or do we say, this is what my organization is going to do to shift to address this challenge? It's really important that we need to create efficiencies in our system and not keep talking about the barriers without solutions. Do we see ourselves as working as one system? Do we see that it's all of our responsibilities? We don't keep pointing the fingers. They're not doing the job. They're not doing the job, but rather we're all together. Are we in constant dialogue with each other across the system, looking where the sticking occurs? Where are people stuck? Where's the system stuck? Do we sit down and have calls right now, because we're all not meetings anymore, but do we sit and say, okay, right now, this is what we're seeing. We're stuck right now. We're seeing that this is happening, this is happening. Let's all talk about what we can all do to unstick that particular area. What difference can we make? And in each component, is everyone working effectively and efficiently in the best way possible? And so, you know, in one community, for example, Jessica said, I just worked in Fairfield, and I worked with 8-9 shelters there. And there were still some additional shelters, like some DV shelters that were, you know, we were not able to bring into the collaborative because of the size of the collaborative. But, you know, but the reality is that when we started, you know, everybody's rules look differently. Everybody's policies look differently. I mean, and, you know, and everybody wasn't working the same way. So there, you know, there were some shelters that were saying, well, you know, we're an X amount of months of shelter. And they tell people that when they would come in, well, you tell me that I've got, you know, 6 months of a safe place that I can be and not really worry about anything. I'm going to just hang in there and start worrying about where I'm going to go about a week before I have to go, right? Versus coming in from day one and changing those conversations. And, you know, and when you start from day one, not saying this is, you can stay here for 6 months, but rather we need to keep moving, changes can be made. And then do we let our challenges limit us in what we're able to achieve? Or do we challenge our limits? And I want you to ask yourself every time you're on a call, every time you're feeling overwhelmed, you know, whether it's at a staff meeting, whether it's a CAN meeting, I want you to just say is like, let's not let this challenge limit our ability. Let's really challenge that limit. Let's push back on it and show that we can make a change here. Next one. So here's your outcomes then. If you're going to have good system flow, you're going to start seeing first-time homelessness and unsheltered homelessness is going down, right? You're going to see a reduction in the length of time people are homeless, and you're going to see an increase in exits from the homeless system. So to permanent housing. So I'm going to say that I know that, you know, the system, right? The continuum reports these things to HUD, right? These are things that go to HUD. But how much do you guys as a community and as providers sit down and look at what are our trends look like for the last 3 years of these reports? And what happened? You know, if they went down, what was working well? If they went up, what maybe wasn't working? What changed? This should not be just a report that gets sent out and people go, oh, yeah, there's a report, file it away, but rather having conversations about this, because all of this information that goes into HUD on these key system outcomes really is all about your system flow. So it's just incredibly important that you all really know this and can talk about it and really look strategically at your own organization and intervention, but also the entire system. Next slide. So, role of each system component. So what is the role of each of you that are out there in your systems? And there's a lot on these slides. I'm going to go through this fairly quickly. Normally I do this in an hour-and-a-half presentation, so we'll see if we can get through this, right? So here's the most important elements, right? You have to have the housing first orientation. You have to have coordinated entry with outreach, diversion, prioritization. You need to have crisis housing. You need to have quick returns to housing with rapid rehousing, permanent supportive housing, but also mainstream housing options. And you also need access to stabilization supports for when people are in housing. All right, but it's not enough. You can have all those components and say, we have every component we need, but we don't have flow. You gotta have flow. Next slide. So housing first. The housing first idea creates system flow. And this is why it's so important that you and all of your staff and all of your colleagues embrace this. It provides the system-wide philosophy that embraces the principle that everyone's housing crisis should be resolved and can be resolved no matter how complex and severe the need. Everybody needs to believe that, or you're not going to have system flow. And you need to then also prioritize both crisis and permanent interventions for the most vulnerable, not for those that are housing ready. And I think that, you know, with your CAN list that you're really trying to do that. But I think sometimes, you know, with having so many people on the list, it's hard to really think about that. And then we need to target and tailor. Everybody needs to get their own unique plan, right? It's not like, okay, this is what rapid housing looks like for everybody, or PSH looks like for everybody, or a rapid exit looks like. Everybody needs something different. So no housing solution, no housing exit should look the same. Next slide. Here's coordinated entry. System flow means that you are reducing first-time homelessness through problem solving. And I think, again, we use you guys an example about how well you're doing this, but I think in the time with COVID, in this, this difficult time, it has been harder to sometimes think about that, or folks are having a harder time coming up with their own solutions through the problem solving. And I think we have to find a way to re-energize ourselves, right? And I think one of the things is actually look at the data. You know, it might feel for you all, because we're in the midst of a crisis, our call volume is way up. But actually look at your numbers, compare where are we this past 3 months with where we were last year this time. And what is, you know, is it been that much? And what are our results these 3 months versus them? And start really talking about it. I think sometimes when we're overwhelmed, which we all are in this crisis, that it makes everything seem sort of a lot bigger than sometimes what it is. And I think even for myself, sometimes I've like gone, oh, my workload just feels so much bigger. And then, so I just take time to look at what I have on my plate and then look at where I was a year ago. And I'm going, oh, actually not so much bigger, just in a different environment. So how can I work with the environment that I am to not feel so overwhelmed by it, right? And I think, again, maybe, and this is, we use this for everybody, but not just using scores to prioritize the top eligible households when a housing option becomes available. I mean, I think really thinking about, you know, when we put people on a list, and I know that there are communities that are only identifying immediately the top 10 people, and those are the people that are on a list. Everybody, they know the scores of everybody else, but they're not keeping a list with every single person's name, because the reality is we get, and then, you know, staff knows, you know, and then people that are being served know that their name's on a list. And if my name was on a quote list, I think that if I stay around long enough, I'm going to get something. And the reality is it's not going to happen. So maybe revision, how do we think about our lists? And do we just keep our list with the top 20 people? And those are the people that we're working on. And then when we house those, then we'll go back through and we'll look at the next top 20 versus, oh, well, Joe, you're on a list, but you're way down here on the list. And Joe goes, oh, well, I'm still on the list, so I'm going to just sit here and hang out for a while. Like, how do we build system flow by thinking differently about that? I'm not going to say anything more. I'm just going to let that sit. I just want you all to have conversations about this. Next slide. Outreach creates system flow. First of all, you need, you know, mobile housing work that's on the streets, in the encampments, in the places where people are unhoused. And it needs to be strength-based and individualized. And you really need to build community partnerships. But I think one of the kinds of things is that you, in addition to identifying those folks, is it's not just about identifying them and getting their score and getting them through coordinated entry and on a list. I am seeing communities that through this COVID have literally ramped up their outreach, and outreach is all about taking people directly from the streets and putting them in housing because they don't have any shelter beds. I'm working with a community down here in Collier County, Florida, and they have like almost no shelter. So when they got their CARES money, they just really ramped it all up on the, you know, on the problem solving side, trained their outreach workers and all of this. And they've like literally been on a monthly basis, you know, which is a lot for them. They want it to be better, but like in the first month they did it, they were able to take 18 people directly to the streets into housing, which they had never done before, and not into shelter. And that was a big impact because their unsheltered numbers weren't huge because they're a small community, but nonetheless, they made an impact, right? And then, you know, again, you want to, you know, yes, provide direct connection to coordinated entry and shelter when they need it, but also making sure that if you can house somebody directly, do that first, right? Does that make sense? I can't look at anybody's faces to see if that is making sense. So if not, let me know. Next one. Emergency and crisis housing creates system flow by first, immediate low barrier access, And I've worked with hundreds of shelters that say, yeah, we're low barrier. And then we start looking at rules and looking at kinds of things. And it really isn't, you know, and sometimes we're low barrier letting people get in, but we still have the barriers that once you're in, there's so many rules to follow that we're exiting people into homelessness. That actually, again, so then our unsheltered numbers go up and our wait lists go up. And so that does not create system flow. So we want to make sure that we really are low barrier. And I can't say this enough. We have to, at the shelter level, ramp up problem-solving rapid exit approaches. There's tons of money this year for rapid exit that you guys got through Connecticut. And yet it felt like it wasn't being utilized. When I was still having conversations with some folks, you know, I was still hearing, well, you know, they're being matched with their PSH now, but they have to wait for the unit to be inspected, or they're waiting for rapid rehousing, but they have to wait they've been matched, but they haven't been called yet. And I heard very few people initially talking about the rapid exit. And when a couple of shelters started really grabbing onto the rapid exit approach and changing all their conversations, the numbers started just increasing. It was amazing to watch the flow happening out of the shelter system. You cannot have shelter flow by waiting for people's name to come up on a list. You've got to use the rapid exit approach. So you want to increase the percents of people exiting to permanent housing. versus homelessness. And you at your shelter level, if you're a shelter, should be looking at that on a monthly basis and looking at even from a staffing point of view, like case managers. If you have 3 case managers, look at each person's housing exits and then start like having conversations. What's going on? Has anything changed? And really looking at that. And then again, belief and expecting that everyone can be housed even without a system intervention. Believing that. I want you to believe that. All right. And then rapid rehousing, again, it's quickly moving people from streets to permanent housing. So again, when connections, and there's a reason it's called rapid rehousing, it's not just a rehousing program. The idea is it's supposed to be rapid. So from the time that somebody does get matched, they should be connected with quickly and moved into housing. And the goal is always in 30 days or less. Make it as quick as possible. Constantly finding housing options and alternatives, which can often be like the shared housing approach is one of the things that we're really having to beef up right now. Thinking outside the box by using shared housing, right? Ensuring that staff are interacting closely with outreach and shelter staff so that we're not separate programs, but we're all one body working together, that we know each other. It's like we're co-workers working together, even if we're not paid to do the same things, that we really are. And then again, making sure that you're providing the least amount of assistance for the shortest period of time. This is not a one size fits all. It should not be that we're a 6-month rapid rehousing or we're a 3-month, but rather we're what the person needs, and we're going to try to keep it as short and small as possible. And I also want to really encourage you in the rapid rehousing, and also all of you, is to really look at places outside the typical places. Talk to, look at roommate situations for people that might have a house and be willing to rent a room somewhere. There are so many other solutions besides our box. And I just want you to think outside the box. Next slide. And then permanent supportive housing is, I think, the main thing that PSH has to really start working on is really thinking on move-on strategies and working within the folks that we work with in communities, so that, because, we can't build enough PSH to make up for when somebody gets it. And we also know, at least my experience in my community was, when somebody was in PSH, sometimes for a year, sometimes 2 or 3 years, they did not need the intensive supports anymore. They might need the subsidy, but they didn't need the intensive support. So we worked with our local housing authority to try to find a way to, to get so many vouchers to get people moved off, but really be having those conversations. Next slide. And then you want to have access to stabilization supports to make sure that you've got connections in the community and their natural support. So there's clear system flow, that you're not hanging on to people longer than you need to, because other people in the community can connect and bring natural support. So really making sure that we're not so necessary, but getting other people connected as well. So what I want, go ahead, next slide. And then I talked a little bit about data, but I want you all at the systems level, at the program level, at the intervention level, at the program level, at the organization level. I really want you to start looking at your data and start saying, is this outcome affecting system flow? And what could we do to change it? Next slide. There you go. Make sure you have the right interventions and programs, right? You got to have flow. So really making sure that at the systems level, your pie is cut correctly. You've got your, your resources going to what's going to be the most impactful. All right. So reimagining. How much time do I have left?
We're doing okay, Kay. There's 20 minutes left, but we do have a little time for questioning at the end. So I just wanted to let people know that if you do have questions, in the bottom right-hand part of your screen, to just put those questions in, and we'll have some time for questions at the end. Okay.
It just occurred to me, I think I really sped up my talking. So I'm going to try to slow down now. And if you ever do get, I don't know if you're going to get a recording of this, it is being recorded, so I think you will. Just put it on slow speed, and then you'll be able to hear what I said. Okay. To me, this was when I really thought about presenting to you guys and this reimagining services. I'm just going to throw things out there. This was literally the way I want you all to think. when you start, what could we do? I just want you as communities, as CANs, as organizations to start just throwing any idea on the table, because nothing is the wrong idea. Ideas are ideas, and it's any idea is okay. And then you start exploring it. So looking at both inflow and outflow. Next slide. So the tub is overflowing, right? So check this out, right? So the tub's overflowing, and we seem to think, and and we've been trying to bail this tub out, right? This is our homeless system. And we had this idea, well, if we get enough rapid housing or PSH, and no matter how fast we bail out, we have to remember that we have to look at both inflow and outflow. It's all of the tub. So keep clicking, because you're going to see little things pop up here, Amber. Keep clicking. Oh, I'm sorry. I want you to go back a little bit more, Amber. I had you click too far, too fast. All right, go back to the tub. All right, so here's what I want you to look at. Oh, it looks like a couple things are off the slide. So basically your wait list are like mops, right? Your wait lists are like mops that are just pushing the water around. It's an outcome, but there's no progress, right? The water's coming out, right? And the water is your shelter wait lists. The water is your unsheltered folks, and the idea is that, a wait list is just like people out there that just sort of keep pushing the mop around. But if we don't stop the overflow, right, we're not doing anything. And so, we can focus only on adding shelter beds, but if you don't look at inflow and outflow, your tub's going to overflow. Or we can keep looking at adding rapid rehousing or PSH, but if we don't look at inflow, we're still going to have a shelter wait list. We're still going to have unsheltered people, and we're going to have that wait list mop just slopping water around on the floor. You see me? I'm slopping my water around. All right, now the next one. So how do we reduce this inflow? All right, now just start popping them up. So I want you to reimagine ways to turn the faucet back and reduce the inflow. Eliminate shelters as an outcome. So what if we would imagine instead diversion specialists have weekly or bi-weekly check-in calls and continue problem solving until solutions found? Don't put anybody on a wait list. Have a call list. So anybody that you can't find a shelter bed for, have a call list. And you continue to stay in touch and continue to have those problem solving conversations. I know some of you are doing a little of that, but I want you to really think about making it an actual programmatic way. What if we would imagine doing that? Another one. Next click. What if we would imagine instead that every unsheltered person is assigned to an outreach worker that continues to problem solve for a housing solution, that we know that there's actually, it's not just outreach people going into general places, but every unsheltered person, we identify that unsheltered person and we have those problem solving conversations with the unsheltered person because we know that the shelters are full. So we have those problem solving. We don't put them on a wait list. Next click. What if we would really look at leveraging our partnerships to connect people to that could address things like their lack of resources, and there are other systems that could keep people in housing. And I know you've had conversations with the prisons and you're working with the jails, but continue to really ramp that up. If we can't start really looking at our inflow and start ramping up new ideas and new resources. And so we have seen communities that actually do not keep shelter wait lists anymore because and I think what happened for me when I used to keep my shelter wait list is by the time I had an opening, then I started at the top of my wait list. And even though, I tell people call in every week. Well, if you're homeless and you're literally living in your car on the streets, the last thing I'm going to do is remember to call in, right? And keep my name on a list. And so how do we make our system take that responsibility and really start looking at ways that we can reduce the inflow on our end instead of just putting somebody on a wait list and okay, we got an outcome. We had this many people go on the wait list, but instead you say that, and I know you're doing the diversion and problem solving, but we also had this many follow-up conversations to continue that. And I think, again, if your unsheltered numbers, are not hugely going up and we have people on a wait list, one of the things that we discovered, and I know you all do a good job of trying to really go out and identify, where people are when they say they're, have no place to go. But I think sometimes if people are on a wait list for shelter, but we've got an outreach team, and those two teams are working together, the outreach team is not finding on a regular basis and working with those people that are, supposedly without shelter, that's a terrible word, that have indicated they're without shelter and need a shelter bed, but we're not finding them. We know that people self-resolve all the time. People self-resolve all the time. And so keeping people on a wait list is not going to make a difference in reducing inflow. Next slide. So how do we increase this outflow? How do we keep this bucket flowing out? So why don't we reimagine new ways to bail water out of the tub more quickly? What would be some new things we could do that we haven't maybe done yet? Or maybe we've done them, but let's try it again and ramp it up again. Sometimes we'll try something for a few months ago, oh, that didn't work. But sometimes it needs more than that. Good. So, and again, to eliminate housing wait lists. I should have made those two together. All right, go ahead. Imagine instead problem-solving conversations daily. Like every single day that somebody's in a shelter, you're not talking about what lists there are. You're not talking about, rapid rehousing. You're not talking about the shelter rules, but every conversation is a problem-solving conversation. That's good social work 101, that we're constantly having these problem-solving conversations. Next. Imagine instead rapid exits with self-resolution. Like those problem-solving conversations are going to lead to rapid exits. I think if we as a system stop relying on the people that have already gotten their name on a wait list and think the only people that we should be doing rapid exits with are the ones that didn't score high enough. Like, stop worrying about the score. Stop worrying about, it's a way to prioritize when supportive housing comes available. It's a way to prioritize when a rapid housing slot comes available, but don't let that score have anything to do with you rapidly exiting people and having a problem-solving conversation and believing they can be exited without that. Next. Imagine instead connecting with citizens in your community for room rentals. Get outside the box of property managers and landlords. But why don't we start making connections, maybe with faith congregations or these, all of these local, community groups that exist out there. And, there's tons of people that have housing that maybe have a room or two that they could rent. And will that work for everybody? No, but instead of saying, well, nobody wants to do that. And I hear that sometimes when I suggest this, people go, well, in our community, have you tried? Let's try it. Like, instead of saying, I don't know if that will work, let's instead do it and try it and see if we can have it make a difference. Say it's 2 people a month, it's 2 people a month. That's going to increase some system flow, right? And roommates. I can't say enough about roommates. And I find that again and again, we know this, but it's like we forget about it. And I just got off before I did this talking to Todd Walker down in Virginia Beach, Virginia. And he said for them down there, because they're, in a resort community, that for single individuals on fixed income, that roommates is the only solution, whether even with rapid rehousing, they still need roommates, or for all their rapid exiting. And they have the majority of their singles are going into 2 bedrooms, sharing a room with one other person, and 4 people in a 2-bedroom apartment, because that's the way they've been able to make it work. And they have not seen returns to homelessness. In fact, the returns to homelessness from shelter have decreased. I think there's another one in here. And imagine instead exploring family and friend options. Continue, even if they first say, I don't have anybody. Talk about those broken relationships. Talk about the burned bridges. Talk about what that relationship was like before that. This is social work 101. Have these conversations. I just want you, when you're looking at this, is continue to think about, where will your imagination take you? This is about imagining any idea. Where will your imagination take you, and what will your system look like without wait lists? And I really want you to have those conversations. Instead of a wait list for shelter, this is what we're going to do. In your next CAN meeting, I want you to say, instead of a wait list for shelter, we will What's that going to look like? And just start brainstorming. Instead of a wait list for housing, we will. Just imagine no waiting at any time. And what would it look like and what could we do? I haven't given you any, if you came on here thinking, oh, Kay's going to have some magic bullet. There are no magic bullets in any homelessness. It is about hard work and belief in the people we serve and belief in strengths, and you all being incredibly strong, creative persons, and you've got solutions. The people that you're serving have solutions, you've got solutions, and so let's let our solutions carry us instead of our barriers carry us and our challenges. So here's my contact information. About 10 minutes left. Looks like there's a few questions, so.
Yes, Kay, thank you so much. That was fantastic. And I think we have a audience that's interested in continuing this conversation. I'm gonna put out a few of the questions to you and see if we can answer some of them in the time we have left.
Okay.
We had one question about a wait list, somebody that's on a wait list. She's a DV survivor with a disability and has a service dog. She's currently homeless, but she had to leave her home. What are her choices until she can get into the system? And I can put out there, just if this is a Connecticut, I think it depends on where you are. If you're from Connecticut or if you're from a different state, we've done a lot of trainings and work with shelters that if having a service dog should not prevent you from getting into any type of housing, that there are rights for those folks that have service dogs, emotional support animals, and also we do have a panel coming up that will talk about pets as well. If she's a DV survivor, she should be in contact with the DV system as well. Certainly calling 211 can get you there, but also the DV providers also have a line of their own. So I would pursue that because there might be DV shelter that's available for her and some assistance there. And if she is also living with a disability, this should be something that prioritizes her as vulnerable. I guess, it's hard to answer some of the specific client questions, not knowing all of the details. Is she currently homeless? Does she have a place to stay would be another part of that, I think, equation. So I want Kay, you to respond. I'm going to throw out another one that I think is somewhat related and would doubled up families get caseworkers as well. So for those two cases, if you can say a few words, that would be great.
Wow. So here's the thing is, I think to me, a doubled up, okay, let me talk about the doubled up family. Mm-hmm. I just think we have to reframe what it means to be doubled up. And I just heard now that we have the highest number of, and this is not, folks that are living in poverty and all of that, since before the 50s, we have the greatest number of more than, one adult household in the same households. Part of it is that, part of the thought is that, it's just people are learning, it's cheaper to live together. We've all had roommates at some time. And I think that, if you can work out a relationship with the landlord and the landlord knows that a household's staying there and you can make it work, getting in to shelter. I think there's this idea out there that if I have a doubled up household, or I know of a doubled up household, or I'm doubled up, if I can get into shelter, that I'm going to somehow magically get something. And I think I've made that very clear throughout this, that the majority of people coming into shelter will not get a subsidy. They will not get PSH. They will not get rapid rehousing because there's not enough of it. And the majority of people are going to have to self-resolve. And one of the self-resolutions is moving in with family and friends. So I think that always, wherever that's coming from. So, I think that if there's an organization that's working already with a doubled up family, does the homeless system have to, deal with that, that if in fact, maybe they're, involved with the school, and then the school could work on some mediation and what is it that's not working in that family and how could that be resolved? I don't know that it needs to be the crisis housing system or the you know, the coordinated entry folks that have those discussions, because everybody can be trained on mediation and problem solving. And like, we've just found that so much as people have beefed up the problem solving, and that the majority of doubled up families were more than willing to stay in that, but there were just issues that had to be resolved. And if those issues could be resolved, especially when they understood that they weren't going to somehow get a subsidy and be able to get an apartment of their own. And I think especially if you're in a high cost community, it's very unlikely that households will be able to stay in their own place. In terms of somebody, you know, and I don't know why the person lost their, you know, their housing with a disability and having the service dog, you know, and so I mean, there's a lot of unanswered things, but I think it's always the idea of having conversations, because I think the question was, how do I get into the system? Well, I think our goal is the system is not made to be an answer to housing issues. That we have to find other answers to housing issues, that the system barely has enough for those that there are absolutely no other answers, that, you know, it's like they burn the bridge, but then it's like very quickly. And again, the majority of people that come into the system leave the system without a subsidy. And so while Mimi said, depending on your disability, you might, you know, be prioritized, but again, there's a whole level of what those disabilities are. And there's a whole level of the length of time homeless, and there's a whole level of everything else. And so that getting into the system does not necessarily get you something. And I think we have to be messaging that. I know I worked with the family providers a couple of years ago during the governor's challenge on that. And I would say, again, let's really be messaging that. So, you know, I do think that if a household's doubled up and they're having issues, or if somebody's lost their housing, and I don't know what that is, and they're having issues finding housing, we need to have those problem solving conversations. I would not say we should be bringing those people into the system, but rather having problem solving conversations and coming up with some more creative ideas about not coming into the system.
That's great, Kate. Thank you so much. And we have a few more questions, so we're going to try to move through quickly so we can get everybody's in. We have a question around becoming more flexible, and, you know, with, I think, both the funding for diversion and rapid exits and empowering people to self-resolve, being able to provide, and I think that we have had flexible funding that's available for helping to replace IDs, car repairs, job search, mediation. Can you just share, Kay, in a few words on that flexibility and the importance of flexibility on both with the providers and also the funding sources?
Yeah, so, you know, if there's funders on this, I mean, we need to have flexible sources of income that may not, because there's so many things that are housing related. It might be that somebody needed, you know, a pair of boots to go to a job that, you know, they had to have, or the people they were living with was going to kick them out, right? I heard that story somewhere. And all that all the diversion specialists did was find out that, okay, if you get the boots and go to work tomorrow and I call the household you're living with, do you think we can resolve this? Then it was like, well, yeah. And in fact, that's what happened. All they needed was these work boots, because I think this household had gotten, you know, had set a limit. If you don't have a job by this time, you have to leave. And so this person's calling thinking, I have no choice. So we need to have flexibility in what those dollars are. But we also need to realize that people have a lot of their own ability to come up with ideas and resources. So the system doesn't fix everything. I think there's this idea that somehow the system is the only answer. And I think it's sometimes a combination of both, is that when we start believing in people and that they are the captains of their ship and they really have the strength, if you have the strength to even come and call for shelter, it takes a lot of ability to navigate our systems and do that kind of thing. And so really building on that. And I think just, you know, always having some flexible pool of resources, but keeping it very short. You know, as like we always say, the least amount of assistance that's necessary so we can help the most people. And I think sometimes I've seen some people, you know, get caught up with flexible resources where it's like now they're just paying for everything, right? And sometimes, you know, flexible resources can be a household just needs to get hooked up with the food bank where they can go to on a weekly basis because they're running out of food with having extra people there. Or somebody could be eligible for some resources. So yeah. Flexible funding is key, but don't depend just on that.
Thank you, Kay. And unfortunately, we're at 12 right now, so I want to kind of pause there just for a minute to stop. We'll answer the questions that are left in the chat box. So I'm sorry we didn't get to all of your questions live. Thank you everybody for coming. I want to really encourage everyone to not miss the former UN Rapporteur on Human Rights, Leilani Farha, Representative Johanna Hayes, and State Senator Saud Anwar will be coming up next and talking about how Connecticut might be the first state in the country to have housing as a right. So you want to go to your virtual program and register that. That starts now. And if you have any more questions, you have Kay's contact information, and you can always reach out to any of us here at CCH. Great presentation, Kay. Thank you so much. Always such a pleasure to have you. And thank you everybody for all the work that you are doing all the time.
Thank you, everybody.